So are you organizing this thing? No, damage is okay. And there's a local council from like local council. Before we, I don't know. Did your staff do that?
No, so we're not introducing other than acknowledging the current.
Okay, good. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. It is great to see everyone. We're going to let the music die at some point. There we go. Okay. Hello and welcome, everyone. It's great to see all of you here. My name is Kareem Mamdani, and I'm the president and CEO here at Ontario Shore Centre for Mental Health Sciences. Thank you for being here today. So as we observe Mental Health Week from May 1st to the 7th, we recognize that 1 in every 5 Canadians has difficulty with their mental health. Today, we come together to honor our commitment to the field of mental health and our ongoing efforts to improve the lives of those that are impacted by mental illness. I'd like to welcome everyone who has joined us today, both in person and online, staff, volunteers, patients, and families. And I understand that we're actually on YouTube right now, so we're live. Today's event also includes a number of notable guests, dignitaries, and community partners, and quite frankly, thank you because you've always been there for us. You're our friends, our neighbors, and we truly appreciate you. On behalf of Ontario Shores, I'd like to welcome all of you. It's great that you're here with us today. So to get us started, let's first take a moment to express our gratitude to the land. Ontario Shores acknowledges the Mississaugas of Scugog Island, First Nations lands, and the people which are covered by the Williams Treaty. For use of this land, it allows us to work and care for others, and we are truly grateful. Every day, our employees and volunteers go above and beyond to improve the lives of our patients. I consider it an honor to serve alongside each one of you. I'd like to express my gratitude to our distinguished guests for their outstanding support, dedication to mental health, and your collaboration. We are excited to continue working to improve the lives of many people impacted by mental illness. Today is an excellent day to reflect on what we have accomplished together, to advance the mental health system, and to renew our commitment to transform the way in which emergency psychiatric care is delivered. So we're delighted to welcome Whitby's MPP and Parliamentary Assistant to the Premier, Lauren Coe. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome him today, as he's truly a staunch advocate of Ontario Shores, and most recently for our work to bring Psychiatric Emergency Services to Durham Region. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I should have Kareem do my introduction everywhere I go, right? That's a great introduction, and thank you. I'd like to take a moment to thank Kareem and all the staff who are here today for all of what you accomplish every day and every month and every year in providing support to not only the residents throughout the region of Durham, but others who come here for help, giving people a hand up when they need them, giving their families the level of support that they need as well. So thank you so much. It's appropriate as we discuss Mental Health Week, isn't it? And the role that you play. But as I reflect a little bit about Mental Health Week and coming here today, and I'm here quite regularly for a variety of reasons. Sometimes with the Minister of Health, sometimes with the Premier of Ontario, who's my boss because I'm his parliamentary assistant. But this week is a time for Region of Durham residents to come together to speak openly about mental health, listen with empathy to the stories of others, and support those who are struggling. And we all have life stories to share, don't we, about mental health? Certainly coming out of the pandemic the last two and a half years. Mental health challenges affect many of us. Yet these issues, as many of the staff will know, are often treated differently than physical health. No one, absolutely no one, should suffer in silence. And by being open with others, we can help break down the stigma surrounding mental health and ensure people seek the care they need. Now, our government is working to create a system where Ontarians of all ages have access to timely and appropriate mental health and addiction supports. Some of you were present for the recent announcement that we made with the Minister of Health about significantly expanding our network of youth wellness hubs. And it's another example of us creating a system where Ontarians of all ages have convenient access to the highest quality mental health and addiction supports when and where they need them. And we've talked about that in other venues as well, not only here. Now, our plan, Roadmap to Wellness, will help build a world-class mental health and addiction system. And how's that going to be accomplished? Well, it's accomplished in part through a $3 billion investment over 10 years. And through that, we're adding additional capacity. But it's built on 4 central pillars: improving quality, expanding existing services, implementing innovative solutions, and improving access, all designed to work together. And I underscore working together. At the beginning of my remarks, I talked about being here often and talking about different and varied priorities and initiatives that we're undertaking with all partners, all levels of government. And it takes that level of collaboration to have the effect that I believe we all want to desire. We're all part of that solution going forward. So together, I believe that we're going to end the stigma that surrounds mental health issues and build a better future for everyone. And I alluded to the fact that we have other partners that we are working with, and we have municipal partners with Mayor Carter here from Oshawa, Councillor Victoria, who is with the town of Whitby. That's illustrative of their commitment to working together, not only with the staff here, but other levels of government as well. So I thank you all for being here. I thank you for the opportunity to participate in Mental Health Week. And as Kareem talked about, I'm here often, not only for Mental Health Week, but I am working very closely with the staff towards realizing the emergency department that we want here in Taylor Shores Mental Health Sciences Center. And I look forward to that continued collaboration, and God bless you all.
Thanks very much, Lauren, for your unwavering advocacy and support of Ontario Shores in our mission. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special treat for you as we introduce our distinguished guests. First, please welcome today's host, Carly Weeks. As a health reporter for the Globe and Mail, she has established herself as a bold journalist who is dedicated to bringing attention to health and healthcare matters that are significant to Canadians. Her work offers a realistic perspective and dispels misconceptions on various subjects, including the issue of prescription painkiller addiction, worries about vaccination, and the influence of large food corporations on nutrition policy, among others. Carly has also written about her own childhood experiences with extreme bullying, becoming a source of information and inspiration for families dealing with this serious issue. Welcome, Carly. Next, I'd like to formally welcome Dr. Scott Zeller, also known as the Earl of Psychiatric Medicine. Dr. Zeller is considered the leading authority on psychiatric emergencies worldwide. He created the EmPATH model of psychiatric emergency care, which has been widely discussed and has contributed to the development of over 15 EmPATH units throughout the United States. He has written several textbooks, as well as numerous peer-reviewed articles and book chapters, and has lectured internationally as a keynote speaker. He has published research on innovative designs for emergency mental health care and has assisted in their implementation in several facilities. Dr. Zeller obtained his medical degree from Northwestern University and finished his residency at the University of California, San Francisco. He is previously the president of the American Association for Emergency Psychiatry. He was also awarded the title of USA Doctor of the Year by the National Council on the Behavioral Health in 2015. He has personally cared for over 80,000 patients in his 30 years of practice, just to highlight a few things. We are also honored to have you both here. Welcome, Dr. Zeller.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm really thrilled to be here. As stated, I'm a health journalist, so I'm in the lucky position where I get to speak to people like Dr. Zeller or Scott every day. So thank you so much for being here and enduring a long travel day to be with us.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
And thank you for the kind introduction, too. Thank you. It's very nice.
I mean, it comes as no surprise to anyone in this room. Demand for mental health services has likely never been higher, and the demands on the system continue to grow. All too often, when patients are experiencing a mental health crisis, there's nowhere for them to turn other than a traditional emergency department with bright lights, a lot of noise, a lot of other people who are in close proximity and pain, a lot of scary sounds. Patients in crisis often being ushered into a cell-like room. Scott, I wanted to ask you, you took a look at this model years ago and just realized this is not working. I wanted to ask you about how you were able to kind of turn that on its head and create this EmPATH unit.
Oh, great question. So I've been doing emergency psychiatry for well over 30 years now, and working in the kind of facilities that sometimes are known as a PES or PES in Canada. I know that you have them in Montreal, for example. So I was working in that kind of environment, and what kept happening was I was seeing news and media stories, internet, TV, newspapers, that were talking about how all these people were, like what you were saying, coming to emergency departments and getting actually stuck there for long hours, often days at a time, waiting for inpatient beds. And we know that that unpleasant environment often made their symptoms much worse, and there were bad outcomes, and they ended up in restraints, and there was assaults, and there was violence, and there was all these bad things. And so, I saw these in CBS News, NBC, New York Times, Washington Post, were all doing these, and they kept saying, well, all these people are waiting for inpatient beds. So clearly the solution is we need to build a lot more inpatient hospitals. Back to you, Jim. And I would hear that. I say, like, well, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense, because that's just kind of like, you have a big hole in your bucket, and you just say, well, the solution is let's keep putting more water in there. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Instead, why don't we kind of fix what we're doing and do it in a better way, and use some of the things we've learned in emergency psychiatry, most of all, which is the great majority of psychiatric emergencies can be stabilized without the need for hospitalization if we immediately intervene, we start treatment, and we get people into a more therapeutic and comfortable environment. So a lot of the work that I had done in my research has been on how do we do a better job with people who are agitated and aggressive. And we find that if we put people in a much more comfortable space where it's high ceilings, windows, natural light, room to move about, that we find that just that environmental change helps people to do a lot better. And amazingly so. Like if you look at the number of people who end up going in restraints in an open, spacious unit compared to a small claustrophobic one, you go with the difference in like from 25% to less than 1%, just from that environmental change alone in many cases. Because so much of ED, we know a lot of our patients do better by pacing, for example, if they're really frustrated, anxious, or in a bad shape. And you can't do that in the emergency room. If you start doing that, somebody will go, hey, get back in that bed or I'll call security. So what if we had a space where it was okay to pace around and okay to move about? And if you wanted to do some exercise, if you wanted to go outside if possible, all these kind of things, even though you were in a very high acuity, dangerous situation. So that kind of led to the ideas behind EmPATH. We've had psychiatric emergency settings for a long time, but a lot of them were kind of what you were describing, where people get put into a small room, which often feels like punishment or a cell. What we've learned is that people in that first 24 hours of a crisis, that human contact is really, really important, and that helps people to get better. So the cell example, let's say you are so suicidal that you really want to die. You don't want to take another breath on earth. Everybody hates you. It's a terrible world. And you get checked into a psychiatric emergency setting and put into a small private cell-like room and close the door, and you lie in the mattress and look at the ceiling, and what's changed? Nothing. Go into some place where you're around other people, and maybe you make a friend. Maybe you do something interesting. Maybe the world's not such a bad place anymore, and things start getting better, and you're on the road to recovery when that happens. And so those are the kind of things that we're talking about. That's what kind of led to the ideas where I said, like, nobody is thinking the right way on this. They're all thinking we need to build more inpatient. How about if we redesign emergency psychiatric spaces to be much more therapeutic in the ways that I just described? And so that's kind of what led to the first things we're fortunate enough in 2015 for a hospital in San Diego County, the hospital in San Diego County and the county itself said, hey, we've heard about your ideas. Let's do a test case here. We created an 8-chair EmPATH unit there, and it's still going gangbusters to this day. And now there's actually several dozen in the United States, and I just got back. They're opening 2 in Singapore. It's going to be 1 in Melbourne, Australia, 1 in Cape Town, South Africa, Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, right near Dubai, and Cairo, Egypt, as well as possibly Scotland, I'm hearing. So
unbelievable. And it's just makes so much sense when you start to talk about it, but putting people in a space where they're comfortable, where they're in a recliner chair, where they're open to talk to staff, where they're seen quickly, and they're not sort of ushered through the system in the same way as patients who are there for an acute physical need right in that moment. And it when you talk about it that way, it makes so much sense. And I should note also, I think you were recently named one of the top people in healthcare design in the United States or in the world. Is that right? The only clinician as well.
For that year, yeah, 2020 or something. Yeah.
But still a remarkable honor. But I think that connection between healthcare and design, when you look out in the beautiful space that we're in right now and all of the green space and that connection between, nature and light and health and wellness, it's certainly one that makes a lot of sense in the design of those EmPATH units for sure.
If I point out real quick, this would make a great EmPATH unit, the room that we're in right here. Seriously, look at this, high ceilings, look at those beautiful windows, spaciousness. Wouldn't you feel more optimistic if it was like the worst day of your life and you were in a space like this? Think of what the typical emergency room space is, and maybe I can't really, but picture in your mind. Unfortunately, especially in the USA, what happens if you're in a psychiatric emergency, a lot of the times, because you end up just having to wait in an emergency department for hours, days for that inpatient bed. Sometimes you're strapped to a gurney, which I found out they call them trolleys in Singapore. That was really interesting. You're strapped to a gurney and you're in a hallway and on your back. And the only treatment you get is a meal a couple times a day. And so compare that to this. There's a hospital that I worked with years ago that their average length of stay for a psychiatric emergency patient was 36 hours, 0 treatment, and all of them were stacked on gurneys, like lying on their backs, looking up at the bare ceiling. There was usually 7 to 10 of them at a time. They called it their hall of shame. And imagine what that would be like compared to being somewhere like this, where there's access to social workers, nurses, psychiatrists. Everything's open. You can move around. There's beautiful views the outside. You can see the sun and the sky and the trees. That's the kind of difference that really, really changed everything. And that's what we're seeing across the US, where once these kind of things are initiated, like I was mentioning, typical ER with this same population, 25% of them would usually end up in physical restraints. In an EmPATH unit, 1 or 2 out of every 1,000 by comparison. So 1 or 2 out of 1,000 or 250 out of 1,000. That's a big difference. Exact same population. And it's all just about changing the dynamic, changing the environment.
Those are unbelievable real world sort of evidence-based metrics showing how successful this kind of model can be. And it's really heartening to hear that, you know, people like you and others are getting on board with these kinds of models that really take into account the person first, the patient first. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about some other real world evidence showing how well this can work, you know, things like reduction in admissions and, you know, better outcomes, that kind of thing. What have you learned from the several years that these have been employed?
Yeah, so what's great now, like I said, there's several dozen of these, and we now are 8 years of these being in creation since the first one opened in 2015, and we're there's at least 40 to 50 in development across the United States right now, and it's really catching on. Some that I find out about them because I read about them in the news, like, oh, Bemidji, Minnesota, how far out, you know. But what's really been nice and really been heartening about all this is that not only is there good data being reported to us from like inside tracks from people, you know, we talk to the people that we helped and we worked with to get this going, and they say, you know, here's some of our data and all that, and that's always really nice. But the ones that really people will pay attention to is evidence-based, peer-reviewed data in major medical journals. And so maybe one of the top, if not the top, journal in emergency medicine is a journal called Academic Emergency Medicine. And they published a study on the EmPATH unit at the University of Iowa. It was in just about a year ago. It was in the February 2022 edition. They actually thought it was so compelling, they made it their editor's pick as the lead article of that journal. Then they did a whole podcast about the study. They were so impressed by it. So here's some of the things that they found out. So of the what they did is they studied their EmPATH unit. By the way, I don't know if everybody knows what EmPATH stands for. It's an academic acronym. It stands for Emergency Psychiatric Assessment, Treatment, and Healing. And the neat thing about EmPATH is that's actually the order of what things happen in the EmPATH unit. You get an assessment, treatment is initiated really quickly, and then healing is allowed to begin. It's also the EmPATH, the emergency path. There's all these kind of cool things about the name, but it's not a brand name. It's not Jello or anything like that. It's actually, it was created to be an academic name. It's in the literature. You can find it on Wikipedia. And so that anybody who wants to create an EmPATH can do it. You don't need to ask anybody's permission or buy a license or all that. It's sort of out there for the world to use. Anyway, so going back to the research, so I apologize about my digression there.
No problem.
Phew. Anyway, so they studied their EmPATH unit, and they compared EmPATH 6 months after EmPATH was officially open compared to the emergency department 6 months before it opened. So they gave it some time to work out the kinks and see what actually was some real legitimate changes in what was going on there. And so realize that in most facilities that if you are determined by the emergency department staff to have an acute psychiatric emergency, so your condition has made you dangerous to yourself, dangerous to others, or incapable of caring for yourself, or really close to any of those conditions, right? So prior to EmPATH, the vast majority of those folks, pretty much 100% of those folks would be destined for an inpatient bed. That's the only possible place that you could go. So here's the things that they found 6 months after they opened. Their average length of stay in the olden days for a psychiatric patient in the emergency department, and this is pretty much true, not just across North America, but across the world, we see that the average psychiatric patient stays in an ER 3 times longer than any other kind of medical emergency. And they end up taking up about 2.5 bed turnovers. So if you're trying to have an efficient emergency department, it's unfortunate that the psych patients are kind of stuck there because it's not good for the patients because you're not doing anything for them. And they're also preventing other people from coming in and being able to get services. So if you ever think, oh, gee, what's the big deal? This is just psych patients and I'm not a psych patient. No, it affects anybody. If you need to come in and you're having chest pain, you've got any kind of a medical emergency, you might be delayed because psych patients are taking up space in the emergency department. So we're hoping that that could change. Anyway, sorry, I tend to digress. I apologize. Anyway, so this great study in academic emergency medicine showed that the average length of stay before EmPATH of a psych patient in their ED was over 16 hours. After EmPATH opened, the average length of stay, and this included everybody who had other reasons for besides their psych emergency, like maybe they'd taken an overdose, maybe they'd cut on themselves and they needed sutures, or all these kind of things. It went from over 16 hours to 4.9 hours. So that's a huge thing. That's like a 75% improvement. The number of patients that they were admitting to inpatient went from about 70% of the folks coming into their department to 25%. So a well over 50% improvement in that. But then there were some other really cool things that they might not have even imagined that was so compelling about this study. One was that the number of people who were returning to the emergency department within the next 30 days for a psychiatric reason dropped by over 25%. So some people might say, oh, in EmPATH, you're only treating people for hours instead of days. Doesn't that mean you're not doing enough and these folks are just going to come back in a few days? No, they actually come back fewer. So maybe we're interrupting a continual cycle of people going in, coming out, going in, coming out, because we're actually giving them treatment within minutes after arrival compared to the usual. We're transferring you to a bed in a couple days, and then you'll see the doctor the day after that, and it's all kind of like that. The other thing that was amazing from the study was that they were able to show that people who were discharged from EmPATH were 60% more likely, which is a pretty impressive number, 60%, to show up for their first outpatient appointment than people discharged from an inpatient bed. So maybe that's why there were fewer people coming back to the ER. We were getting people plugged into the outpatient system, and that they were actually maybe seeing things differently. And I think maybe with EmPATH, and people say, like, why do you think that is? That all these people are more likely to show up for their outpatient appointment? Saying maybe we're helping people to see psychiatry and our psychiatric system as not their enemy and not their adversary, but as actually people who care about them and want the best things for them. So that maybe when they're discharged from EmPATH, you say, like, you've got an appointment with your psychiatrist on Thursday, they'll say, like, you know, those people seem to care about me. They seem to think that I was doing the things I should be, and maybe I should take my medicine. Maybe I should follow up with my doctor. And then that means they're not going to have a crisis or an emergency again. What we're trying to do in emergency psychiatry is change an emergency patient into an outpatient. And our best thing that we could possibly do is help them to get better so that they never have an emergency or a crisis again. And that's our goal.
It's amazing. It's kind of like the holy grail, right, for medicine. Like, how do you sort of, interrupt those cycles and, treat the underlying symptoms that keep bringing people back again and again. So it's so remarkable to hear some of those numbers and how successful that can be. It's really, it's great. There's other models that exist in terms of, helping psychiatric patients in crisis, whether it's a dedicated space in an emergency room or, there's a whole host of models that are out there. I wanted you to comment on those. I mean, obviously you're a little bit biased as the creator of the EmPATH unit, but I mean, what sort of makes this stand out from your perspective as someone who is an expert in emergency psychiatric medicine compared to some of the other models that you've seen that are out there?
So you're right. So there's a couple other things that are well known, and so there's somewhere there's just like you said, let's create a dedicated space in the emergency department itself. So we'll just have let's say we have 4 wings in our ER, and maybe we're going to say, okay, wing C is only going to be for psych patients from now on. Maybe you do a few things with that to make it a little safer. Sometimes they have something what they call a garage door. Where they pull it down, it covers up the things for electricity and oxygen and all that, so that there's no risk of people finding a place to be able to use for what we call a ligature, or something you could use to create a strangulation or something like that. But it's still kind of stark and barren, and it feels very much like a prison cell. We haven't really changed the environment. We've just dedicated a space. Maybe we've done a good job and added some knowledgeable mental health personnel to that space, but it's still kind of a not very optimistic, kind of a negative space. The other alternative that we hear sometimes is people setting up alternative destinations, which are not affiliated with any kind of hospital system or anything like that, where it will be a community crisis center, and it might be in like an office park. It can be basically anywhere. And these are wonderful, wonderful programs. And if you are ambulatory and pretty high functioning, and you've had a really unfortunate thing, let's say you've had a job situation, you've had a bad time in your marriage, school problems, anything like that, you can go to those places and you can get the help you need, and they do wonderful, wonderful work. Sometimes people, unfortunately, look at that model and say, oh, well, all the patients that we're seeing in the ER should be able to go there. And it's really not appropriate to even think of it that way, because we have urgent cares that might be in the pharmacy where you can go to if you've got sniffles or something like that. And then you need to have an emergency department where if there's a car accident, or plane crash, or heart attacks and things like that, you need to go there too. So if we have these community crisis programs, they're a great place for what we might call mild to moderate crises, but we need something that's higher, that doesn't have exclusions. For example, if you've taken an overdose, you can't go to a counseling center. You need to go somewhere where you've gotten a bit higher level of care. But you also, if you have people who are very suicidal, so they need constant supervision, who have acute psychosis and maybe auditory hallucinations telling you to do not very good things, mania, all kinds of different things with schizophrenia. If you have acute intoxication, if you have acute withdrawal, if you have any other medical problems, you need a higher level of care. And that's kind of where EmPATH comes in, where it's more like the highest level of care for acute emergencies. And it's not something you can do in the community. I kind of think of EmPATH as an ICU for psychiatric patients. And so if you think of the whole spectrum of crisis or emergency psychiatry, we want to have good options at each level. And we want to encourage people who are able to use those more community-focused options. And what we would try to avoid is having people go into the emergency department itself, because we know that that's going to be a suboptimal environment, and a lot of that space is designed for people with more physical things. So it would be great if we had that psychiatric ICU where people can go, and it's really designed to be the most optimal environment for healing and optimism, and at the same time can handle and work with people who have really serious emergencies. And it's not something we can just say, please sit in this room and talk to this person. It's no, we've got doctors, we've got nurses, we've got professionals who can work with you. So that's kind of like, I often say that EmPATH is the missing link in the crisis medical system. And it really fixes that whole huge hole that's been there for far too long.
It reminds me of some of the advances that have been made around, treating cardiac patients who are coming in. They're ushered in, and there's a step, and all the staff know the protocol, and and people who are experiencing stroke. I mean, the outcomes for patients have improved so much because everyone's on the same page. The system was sort of tailor-made around those patients. Sort of the same thing applies here. You're not going to use the same kind of system you would for a cardiac patient, but you want to custom build a treatment program or a healing, program that's going to actually set them on the right course, that's going to address the needs that they have in that moment of crisis. And it sounds like it's certainly from the Canadian experience, just something that we have very little access to. And it's just, so desperately needed, some of the stories that we hear and some of the things we cover as reporters. So it's just something that is so, this communities need so badly.
No, your analogy is really insightful, and comparing it to what we'd call a STEMI lab for people with myocardial infarctions. And if you get them in and you help them right away, or there's the same thing we can do with stroke or telestroke and all that. It's completely analogous, and it's actually just really identical, because if you get people the help they need in the appropriate environment, we see dramatic improvements, and we don't say, let's do things the old way. So if you come in to, like, say, the hospital emergency department with an asthma attack and you're short of breath, we go like, can't breathe, short of breath, please help. They don't take you and say, oh, well, please come back. We've got a lovely hallway here in the back part of the hospital. Please have a seat. In a day or two, we'll have an asthma hospital to transfer you to. And that's basically what we've done with psychiatric emergency patients when they come to a typical emergency department. But we can do much better, like what we were saying. We know that if we do all these things, we're going to get much better outcomes. So why not do it that way? Just like we've done, like you said, with those other illnesses.
Exactly. We're going to open up to Q&A in a minute. But before we do that, I thought I would just ask, we're going back to that analogy where you have people who are experiencing symptoms of a heart attack. There's often now sort of custom built cardiac units, and there's a lot of money that's spent, rightly so, in a lot of those areas. And sort of as we're sitting here and you're reflecting on this space and how beautiful it is with staff available, just how kind of the significant how significant it would be to have that kind of a unit actually built in a place like this, where you have access to some really state-of-the-art staff. That this is one of a very small handful of hospitals dedicated to psychiatric care in the province.
Well, that's one of the great things about it. I mean, if you have a psychiatric facility with a lot of great trained staff, that gives you a lot of wonderful abilities to use an economy of scale and share employees across the system, and you don't have to try to create this absolutely brand new thing with tons and tons of employees, but you can actually use what you've got in your space and help to develop it and make it into a truly across the board system, because you wouldn't have a general hospital without an ER. So why would you have like a psychiatric facility without a psychiatric emergency department? Because that way you're going to make the most efficient use of things, and you're going to help people in their time of need really quickly. Like the EmPATH model, one of the key facets of it is seeing a psychiatrist or a psychiatric provider within 60 minutes after arrival. And people say like, well, yeah, okay, EmPATH is this level, but the highest level of care is inpatient. Well, and I'm not talking about here. I'm talking about general inpatient psych units across North America, across the world. If you get admitted there from like a regular medical emergency department, you usually get kind of sent over there, sometimes, taken in a van or an ambulance, sometimes many miles. And you arrive there in the evening, and the nursing staff will check you in and show you your room and everything, and then get you in there and say, okay, doctor's going to see you tomorrow afternoon. And so there's not a lot that's going to be totally different for those first 24 hours. You're really just kind of getting put in a safe place. So EmPATH, during that same amount of time, you're going to see a doctor within the first 60 minutes. You're working with people around the clock. We think of things in terms of hours rather than days. That's why typical EmPATH unit, that same population that 100% would be going to inpatient facility beds, 75 to 80% of them end up getting better in less than 24 hours and going home. And we just see this around the board. So there's the one that you may have been seeing in the video, the University of Minnesota's one that's in Minneapolis. They are discharging about 85% of the folks that they see, which is really remarkable. And speaking of the data we were talking about, they're just about to publish in another prominent emergency medicine journal with data very similar to the Iowa model, but actually that even dramatically improved discharge. And you can think about what that means in terms of overall savings for the system. Hospital I was just in touch with in the Sacramento area of California, their EmPATH unit, they were just able to demonstrate, and they give a speech to the state's Senate, that in the 3 years they've been open, they've saved the state's Medicaid, which is our, I'm sure many people in here know what that is, but it's our kind of if you're disabled or poor or unemployed, that's the healthcare for people in the USA. And a lot of people with serious mental illness have Medicaid because it's what you get if you have a mental health disability. But anyway, so that's the predominant funding source of reimbursement for a lot of the EmPATH units in California, at least. And they were able to show that in the first 3 years of operation, they saved the county mental health department $36 million. That's including the cost of running the EmPATH unit. That's the money they saved by not admitting people to inpatient. What the typical inpatient stay would be, that they were discharging 75% of the folks they saw. It cost about $2,000 per EmPATH stay. They avoided a $12,000 inpatient stay in 3 out of every 4 patients. So every $8,000 that the Medicaid spent, they saved $36,000. And so that goes on and on and on. So it's easy to get into the millions by giving better and more immediate care in a more therapeutic and appropriate environment. I mean, it's a win, 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 win.
Really remarkable results, and thank you so much for reflecting on that. And now I'm going to open it up to Q&A, and so to help us with that, I'm actually going to invite up and introduce Dr. Phil Klassen, the Vice President of Medical Affairs at Ontario Shores. Dr. Klassen is also an assistant professor at the University of Toronto's Department of Psychiatry and Medicine and an expert in forensic psychiatry. Welcome, Phil. Thank you so much. There is a microphone right over here, folks, so if whoever has a question or would like to ask one of these fine gentlemen anything about what you've just heard, please do so. We've got one, so we'll just wait before I'll ask my own, but no, we've got one.
Morning. Thank you very much for your presentation this morning, and congratulations on your model. I'm a great believer that it's the direction that our province needs to go in, and I'm very pleased that MPP goes with this morning, because I think it's an important message that the Premier also hears. There's a couple things that I want to bring forward. I represent the great city of Oshawa, and I know there will be cheering when I hear that. Just every month I get our stats in regards to overdoses that are related to opiate poisoning. We know in our great city that we have individuals that are suffering with both mental health and addiction issues. But many of those addiction issues that we've been able to see through our data, those individuals up into the point of almost 96% have a severe mental health issue. So my question being is, under this type of idea, our paramedics will be first on scene with our fire department, our police department, and probably security there. They'll evaluate what they're dealing with. In many circumstances, it is related to an overdose. How do they make the determination that even though it looks like an overdose here, that we need to be able to help them because we understand that there's a mental health component to it? So that's my first question, is how will that work, and how will we be able to determine it? My second question is, the program itself sounds wonderful in regards to making sure individuals get the right care at the right time in the right environment, which I'm 100%. Environment plays a significant role. But is there another component through your studies and through the operation of EmPATH across the United States that you've also had to look at a housing component on the back end to make sure those individuals are then supported into the housing component? So those are my two questions.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, great questions, and thank you very much for that. First off, in terms of the comorbid substance abuse issue, we know just in general that the people coming to EmPATH, that this is what we might call the serious and persistently mentally ill population, which is the predominant numbers of folks coming. But then there's, anybody could end up coming. It could be, the son of the big corporation CEO, or the person who's living on the streets, and everybody in between. But that being said, we know that well over 50% of the folks coming are also going to have some comorbid substance abuse issue, whether it be acute or chronic or dependence or withdrawal. There's going to be something going on. So EmPATH is really set up with the idea that we understand that most people are going to be coming in with a comorbid substance abuse issue, and we're not going to try to prevent or tease them out. There's a lot of those programs, like I was saying before, those less acute programs that will say, oh, we can't see you because your blood alcohol is above 0.08. And what we often say in EmPATH is we don't look for a certain blood alcohol level. We actually look at what you're actual doing. How are you? So our rule of thumb is if you're walking, talking, and able to eat a sandwich, you're ready for EmPATH. And we don't worry about like, oh, you're over 0.08, because I always say, well, they're not going to drive the ambulance over, so they should be okay. So the idea being is that we know that there's often this close intertwining of substance abuse and mental health issues. In fact, the evolution of this concept of the term behavioral health really was created because you can't really separate behavioral health and mental health and substance abuse. They're kind of intertwined. So we think of them together as behavioral health. And if we're going to really work with somebody, we need to focus on helping on both aspects. So when somebody's in EmPATH, one of our key goals is, as I said, we want to change an emergency patient into an outpatient. So we want to get somebody who might be, a common thing we might see is somebody saying, I'm suicidal because I can't stop using methamphetamine. Okay? We can work on that suicidality and EmPATH in those few hours we have, and we can get you ready to get you into a methamphetamine program. And then the meth program is going to be more prepared and willing to take you because they're not concerned that you're suicidal. So we can really focus on those kind of things and get you prepared for that next level. And I think that goes into your next question, which was about housing. EmPATH is not going to solve every problem in the world. And it's not there to say, like, once you have an EmPATH unit, there'll be no more homelessness or anything like that. But again, sorry if I keep repeating this, but our goal is we want to change an emergency patient into an outpatient. And when we do that, we can make that person who's now an outpatient that much more capable and ready to deal with some of those other challenges that are in the world, be it housing, be it long-term programming, following up medications, all those kind of things. So when you're an EmPATH, a part of the whole design is that if we think that you're good and ready to go, we're going to make sure that you're sparkling when you leave. We've got laundry, we've got showers. You're going to leave, and if you have to go to an interview for a new place to live or a job interview, you're going to be clean, you're going to be in good shape, you're going to be ready to face that. If there's an opportunity for a housing program, we're going to be talking to them. Maybe they'll come and meet you at EmPATH, and we're going to have a lot of relationships with outpatient world, be it outpatient mental health, outpatient behavioral health, substance abuse, but also housing programs and other residential long-term solutions. Like I said, we're not going to be building new facilities for residential or things like that. We're just trying to make people ready for that outpatient world. But what we have found in the places that EmPATH exists, some places like in California, there's a state law that if you go to an emergency program, they have to find you a place to live if you're homeless when you leave, unless you refuse. And so that creates challenges for emergency departments and EmPATH units in California. What it also means, though, is that the people who work in EmPATH go out and make relationships with community programs, be it mental health programs, substance abuse programs, housing programs, and get to know them on a reciprocal first name basis. So these folks know, hey, if your shelter program is having a tough time with an individual, send them EmPATH. We're going to help them get back in good shape again. On the other hand, when we've got somebody who we think is doing great, how about we work together so that you can have them have a place to stay for a while and help them get into a long-term situation. And that's really what's kind of nice about it. We're not just pushing people out the door and saying, here's a pamphlet, find a place to stay. We're going to really help people get ready and get those relationships together. Does it work every time? Of course not. But are we going to do better than we've done in the past? Yes.
Thank you so much for that. And we have one question here.
Hi, my name is Marilyn Crawford. I'm the deputy mayor for the great town of Ajax. Ajax has the number 2 amount of population for unsheltered individuals. And today I was recently told of a young man, 15 years old, who has taken his life. So I want to thank you for having this conversation. This is an important conversation for us to have. I first heard of EmPATH through Mayor Carter, and quite honestly, it has not left my mind since we started talking about it. Ajax has Ajax Pickering Hospital. Their emergency wait times are astronomical at this point. To me, this makes sense to have an emergency place where it treats the needs of the people coming in and not having to sit in the wrong place. So my question to you is, as municipalities here along in Durham region, what can we do to help you? And have you done any advocacy with the province on this piece?
I might turn over to Dr. Clausen for that question. It's a perfect, but thank you. And I appreciate you telling me the sad story.
Yeah, I mean, is this on? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I'm actually the best person in the hospital to respond to that. I can say that we have been engaged in advocacy for a number of years now. We've been working with Dr. Zeller and with our design people as part of our master plan to to try to bring the EmPATH style unit to Ontario shores. Certainly, I mean, you could see from MPP Co's presence and the presence of other people here, been working with people in government as well. You know, we remain hopeful that with this advocacy process, that ultimately we're going to see an EmPATH unit here. I think it's been maybe 4 years roughly since we put together the master plan and began that process. So this is part of just continuing to tell the story. I think the interesting thing is the story continues to get better. You know, you were hearing Dr. Zeller talk about data, and one of the things that we were a little shorter on in the early days was data in terms of outcomes, because there were more limited number of EmPATH units, and it takes time to get data, and you need academic health sciences to have some EmPATH units because they'll be more likely to publish the data and those kinds of things. And also, you know, EmPATH units from different regions so that you can show that the model works in different kinds of environments with different kinds of patients in academic and non-academic settings. And you know, the publication of this kind of outcome data, I think, should lead us to feel that much more optimistic that this is a way to go. And I think you were telling me, Scott, earlier this morning that, in fact, from a design perspective, although the design is critical, I think the notion, as somebody who'd worked in an ED, the notion that you treat people right away is so foreign to most emergency, I mean, unless they're hitting you, is so foreign to most emergency departments. That itself is a huge culture shift, that you're actually going to try to take care of this person's problem as soon as they arrive, which is a big change. But the design piece as well, and maybe I'll just segue, Scott, you were saying this morning that there's an agency in the United States that provides guidelines of some kind with which I'm not familiar, FGI, and their comments about EmPATH.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. FGI is the United States organization. It stands for Facility Guidelines Institute. It's about 100-year-old organization that used to be part of the U.S. government, and now it's a semi-private agency that every 4 years comes out with the official guidelines for the USA for the design, construction, and licensing of hospital and healthcare facilities. So very, very influential, and each of our 50 states has their own laws and regulations on how a hospital or you know, facilities should be built and how they should be licensed, and when surveyors come in and say, are you doing the right thing, you should do all that. So it's all based on what the FGI comes up with. So like I said, they do it every 4 years, and 2022 was how long ago? Oh, that was last year, and that was go figure. That was the last edition, and so they have a whole section on EmPATH units for the first time, which is nice. So this is now a well-established model with extensive guidelines. In fact, since it was the first time they'd included it, they had a 60-page white paper as part of the FGI guidelines, specifically about what they call behavioral health crisis units in hospitals, which is they just couldn't bring themselves to call it EmPATH because it just sounded too cool, you know? and so they called them BHCUs, or behavioral health crisis units. But they have that now established, and all the kind of things like you've been talking about doing here are now a fixed, established model that's, you know, every architectural firm in the USA has that book on its shelf that says, okay, here's the BHCUs, here's what you need, here's how far the sink should be from the recliner, and all this kind of cool stuff, but also just a general overall saying, this is an important way to do things, and it should be in your hospital.
Thank you so much. We have time for one question, about 1.5 minutes.
Well, I'll be very,
Better
very
not
quick.
let me answer it then.
Dr. Zeller, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I will try to be brief. I think sometimes how we arrive at hospital in a psychiatric emergency can really set the scene. My role, I'm part of a mobile crisis intervention team with Peterborough. I'm a mental health worker with Canadian Mental Health. I'm here with my colleagues from Peterborough Police Services. I'd like to think that the work we do is like an extended arm of EmPATH, where we go out, we do try to divert away from hospital emergency rooms, but those that clearly do need to be transported, we do so in an empathic, gentle, respectful way, and then we aid that transition into the crisis unit. And I'd like to sort of hear your reflections on how mobile crisis teams relate to EmPATH.
Oh, great question. And I'm second to none in admiration for people who do mobile crisis. And thank you for your work. Yeah, I think one of the problems that you've had historically is you're out there doing that amazing intervention in the field, and then you bring somebody to the ER, and then they're just sitting there, and nobody's doing anything about it. And as somebody else was mentioning a bit ago, everybody else is getting immediate treatment, and they're just kind of putting them in a corner and saying, we're going to find them a bed and we'll send them there in a couple of days. So a couple of interesting things we've seen in the research from on the mobile crisis and that whole determination. If you can have that different direction, like if you have the opportunity to go straight to EmPATH with a mobile crisis patient, as opposed to a person who goes to the regular general hospital emergency department. There's a good study that was just published in another top emergency medicine journal about when people have that choice to go directly to a psychiatric emergency campus or directly to a medical emergency campus. And what they're able to show is that with a very simple algorithm, like nobody who's unconscious, nobody who's having a heart attack, nobody whose blood pressure is 1,000,000 over 1,000,000, it's like real simple things that any basic field worker can understand. That if you have that simple algorithm, the times that people go to the wrong place with an understanding that people are going to be kind of erring on the side of safety to begin with, it's usually about once every 3,000 or 4,000 times. It's just so simple to go to the right place. And knowing that you have EmPATH to go to directly is going to mean that you're going to get those folks, that you're going to continue that care that you've initiated in the field in crisis. And there's going to be that subset of folks that are just too acute that you can't just kind of rectify things there on site. You need somewhere to bring them in, but you're not going to interrupt it and then just have 2 days of nothing happening after you've done all this great work that's kind of almost wiped away. Instead, it's going to be a seamless continuum so that you're really going to get people the help they need. And then again, 75–80% of those folks are going to do that much better and be able to go home. And then we're going to want you on the tail end, like maybe we say, like, this was a kind of a tough one, we were a little uneasy, but could you stop by and visit them tomorrow and just make sure that everything's still okay? And that way we have both sides of EmPATH being involved with the mobile crisis team. So that would be an awesome thing to have possible.
If I could just offer very quickly, the other thing about EmPATH, and certainly part of the commitment that we're wanting to make, is to get you back into the field more quickly. A lot of times also police officers, first responders, mobile crisis workers have to stay with the patient until the hospital is satisfied that things have settled down, and that can be a long time. That can be hours. Certainly in Ontario, it can be hours. And our commitment is that you, on average, would be back in the field within 20 minutes.
8 to 13 hours. Yeah, it's obviously time for something to change. We could keep talking all day, but I have to leave it here.
Or at least I could.
Thank you so much. And Phil, please, last moments of reflection and conclusion.
Yeah, I think it's always very exciting to hear Scott talk about this for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's an exciting concept. Secondly, Scott was there from the very beginning, from Alameda State Hospital, right? From the very beginning. So Scott is tied into all the latest developments as they happen with EmPATH, and there's now EmPATH units for children and for families. Scott tells me people are actually building different kinds of EmPATH units with different kinds of options as well. So Scott's been a wonderful resource for us. Thank you also, Carly. But it's great to hear about it. It's very exciting. You're passionate about it because you see it working. And from my perspective, I think for our perspective too, we're excited to see that the data is really building a stronger and stronger and stronger case. It's going from a great idea to a great idea with tremendous amount of data. So thank you everybody for coming today. We really appreciate it during Mental Health Week. Thank you for the work that you do. We're committed to trying to improve emergency services. Thank you, Carly, and thank you, Scott, as well. And that is the end.
Thanks, everybody.
It's exciting.